Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I'm going to be talking about Powered by the Apocalypse versus Dungeons and Dragons. Alright, so the reason I'm talking about this today is Chalice and Chains brought forward. Chalice and Chains is another YouTube channel. He basically does exactly the same thing I do, does commentary on a wide range of tabletop role-playing games, including Dungeons and Dragons. And recently, and I really have a lot of respect for Chalice and Chains. The reason why is I feel like he's very similar to me in that he is a tabletop role-playing game explorer. And I've been thinking about this a lot. Basically, Dungeons and Dragons is such a wonderful game. It really, it's so precious to me. On my shelf, I have, Player's Handbook, Monster Manual, Dungeon Master Guide, 1E, 2E, 3E, 4E, 5E, and those are, aside, there's one book in the world that's more important than those to me, but other than that, those are some of the most important books in the entire world to me. They're just cherished, right? But more and more, I'm really considering Dungeons and Dragons as a launching point, and I really feel like when, Dungeons and Dragons is the father of all tabletop role-playing games, but it really is, it's the launching pad, right? And so when you look at, I look at a guy like Adam Cobell, right, or Monty Cook. They used Dungeons and Dragons to launch off, and now they're in space and they're going, different places. People like Emily Care Boss, right? Emily Care Boss, played Dungeons and Dragons at one point and has blasted off from that point and has designed her own games and is now, going past Jupiter, And then, but if you look at the tabletop role-playing game scene, you see so many people who are just like milling around the launch point, right? And I think that's really what a focus on D&D is, right? Now, let's make it super clear. So I think my interaction with Dungeons and Dragons is I play 1 to 3 story arcs every single year. Those story arcs are 3, 5, 7 sessions, right? And it's always with the latest version, Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. And then the other thing is I spend a ton of time studying what is going to be next for Dungeons and Dragons, right? And so, like, as soon as it's announced, actually, I'm studying right now what's going to be in 6th edition. But it's really, really fascinating what. And then I spend a ton of time and then when the new Dungeons and Dragons drops, I read that cover to cover, and then I do play it so that I see it in play. But really, Dungeons and Dragons isn't where I live, and I'm positing now, if you're listening to commentators who are just super Dungeons and Dragons focused, start switching over to Chalice and Chains. He's an explorer, right? He's not just walking around the launch pad, right? He's in a spaceship flying to other, galaxies. It's as far as TRPGs go. So Chalice and Chains brought forward this really fantastic summary of the difference between PBTA, Powered by the Apocalypse system, and Dungeons and Dragons system, rules systems wise, right? And he explained it. Now, Chalice and Chains explained that this was not his content. This is from another person that he listens to, right? And he was signal boosting it on his own channel and talking about it, right? So Chalice and Chains brought this forward, but he didn't really invent what I'm about to say, or he didn't craft it originally, right? So here's what he said. Powered by the Apocalypse is a game where, Dungeons and Dragons is a game where the game master sets up the world and answers the player's questions. Powered by the Apocalypse is where the game master sets up questions and the players answer them. It's brilliant. It's it's principle level, right? It's explaining this is the core difference, right? And I think it's really important because honestly, when I looked at Powered by the Apocalypse games, it really looked, it looks sloppy to me, right? One of the issues that I caused was it has a very casual tone. When most of these games have a very casual tone, they're not instructive. They're like, hey, let's learn this together. And I'm like, you're writing the book. Like, just talk with authority, right? And it's kind of strange to me, right? And then the rules will be just like spread like butter over the whole book, right? Whereas I really like to see a book where, like, here's 10 pages. This 10 pages contains all the rules. Here's the rest of the world, and the rules are inserted into that content accordingly, right? You know what I mean? And so I really don't like the organization of most PBTA games, but I have to say, after hearing Chalice and Chains, who I think has a better understanding of Powered by the Apocalypse games than I do, this is fundamentally important, right? So Dungeons & Dragons is a game where the Game Master sets up the world and then answers the players' questions. Powered by the Apocalypse is a game where where the Game Master sets up questions and the players answer them. This is absolutely brilliant. And once you hear that, once you see it, right, you could it just kind of unfolds like a flower. Like, you could see how beautiful a Powered by the Apocalypse game could be, right? Now, all right, so let's talk about this. Let me just give you an example, right? So the Dungeons & Dragons game starts with the Game Master saying, you're in a tavern in Silver Hollow, and you hear a rumor of a dungeon 20 miles away where one of the young men from the village only last year went to find treasure in the dungeon, but he's been gone for a full year. And you see, his mother is crying in the beer that she's delivering to that barbarian over there, right? So the Game Master has set up the world. And then the players are like, oh, so the mother's really sad. Does she have any other children? I'm going to ask her, right? And, and then at that point, the players are asking questions about the game that the Game Master has set up, right? Well, same situation with Powered by the Apocalypse, okay? The Game Master says, you're in a tavern in Silver Hollow. Rogue, cleric, fighter, wizard. What rumors have you heard of the surroundings of Silver Hollow? And the cleric says, oh, well, I heard that someone here in the town actually has a dragon scale that they keep on a necklace around their neck, even though it's just a farmer's hollow, and even though there's just really farmers here. And then the rogue says, oh, well, I heard that there's a dungeon very close, and that essentially most of the dungeon had been, adventures had gone down and gotten most of the dungeon out. But what they didn't realize with this was that on the third level, where that dungeon is completely empty, there's an entrance. There's a rumor about an entrance that would unlock seven more levels of that dungeon, right? And then the fighter says something, and then the wizard says something, and basically 4 different paths can come out of that, right? And that Game Master has no idea what they're going to run that night, right? But the game has equipped them to do this, right? Now, I think this is awesome. I think this is the best explanation of what the PBTA games are, what the Powered by the Apocalypse games are. Okay, Powered by the Apocalypse, by the way, it came out with Vincent Baker. He's still making games today. The games are highly inaccessible, in my opinion. But he's a brilliant mind, right? But he's a lot like Andy Warhol. His stuff is hard to grasp at first, right? And so one of the things that happens with Powered by the Apocalypse is it went through the filter of Dungeon World, which was, by the way, Vincent Baker's game was Apocalypse World. And then Sage Latora and Adam Cobell came along, and they created Dungeon World, right? And that thing has become a beast. It went farther than Apocalypse World ever went, and really has been an ambassador to the world for Powered by the Apocalypse. And then Powered by the Apocalypse got lots and lots of awesome little games that came out afterwards, right? One of the ones that I have played is Night Witches, which, if you haven't played that, it's amazing. Check it out. It's by Jason Morningstar. All right, so here's the issue, right? I think this is, so one, I'm very appreciative to Chalice and Chains for going out and exploring other feeds on, other great Game Master commentary on specifically on the topic of PBTA, and for bringing forward this really concise, really wonderful explanation of the difference between Dungeons and Dragons and Powered by the Apocalypse. Now, basically, now that I understand it, and I have played Powered by the Apocalypse, it really cements a belief that I have about Powered by the Apocalypse. So here's the question. Is it better than Dungeons and Dragons? I think the answer is no. And the reason why is I think Dungeons and Dragons is still fundamentally a better system, and here's why. Powered by the Apocalypse has the possibility of creating far more beautiful games than Dungeons and Dragons does, but at a drastically reduced rate, right? So if you go into a Powered by the Apocalypse game, right now, the tabletop role-playing game industry is structured around people playing with their friends. This is another thing. So one, I truly am an explorer of the tabletop role-playing game scene, right? The community, the content, the industry, all of that, right? And one of the there are a lot of assumptions that the industry makes about the community. And one of them is that people want to play with their friends. And more, I am beginning to question whether that is useful, right? Everybody has the right to play tabletop role-playing against their friends. I'm not saying that they don't, right? But the reality is, right now, Powered by the Apocalypse has a problem, in my opinion. And the reason why is in order to make a beautiful game, a really cool game that you as the game master enjoy and all the players enjoy, you need 5 game masters. That's when Powered by the Apocalypse shines. Not even shines, that's when it functions, okay? So I also ran Dungeon World. So I've run Dungeon World several times. And I've run Night Witches, right? Night Witches went extremely well, but I kind of did some things to make it go better. But anyway, here's the issue: Powered by the Apocalypse functions well when you have 5 game masters, and not just regular game masters. When you have 5 good game masters, right? Good game masters are often good players, or I guess you could also switch out 1 or 2 of those game masters with phenomenal role players, right? Phenomenal players. Powered by the Apocalypse functions when everybody at the table is really, really solid. By the way, more and more I think about this, the more Powered by the Apocalypse I've actually played. In addition to Dungeon World, and I played an L5R skin of an L5R game, a Legends of the Five Rings game, that was run with Powered by Apocalypse. That was at a convention. All right. So that's the problem with Powered by the Apocalypse. I really think it can make absolutely better games than Dungeons and Dragons if you have the right players. Dungeons and Dragons is set to have a fun game and a functional game if you have 2 great role players, 1 great role player, 2 middling role players, and 1 terrible role player. You can still have a functional game. You bring that same group into a Powered by the Apocalypse game, you got a problem, right? Because the poor role player is going to be, often will be complaining about what's happening. They won't understand what's happening. They'll clam up, and then the other players might not, understand that they're just not getting it. Try to pull them in, even though they don't want to be pulled in. They don't know how to interact. And I have seen this in Powered by the Apocalypse games. So Powered by Apocalypse games demand highly, highly proficient players in every seat. Dungeons & Dragons doesn't. The system is designed so that you can have a fully functional game with 1 awesome role player, 2 middling role players, and a terrible role player, right? Player overall. And so I think that, this is something that I've come to understand now, especially now that I see this much more succinct view of Powered by the Apocalypse. Now, and I will say this is a major danger for Powered by the Apocalypse games, because every PBTA game that comes out, you could just smell it on it, that these designers have play tested this thing with other game masters, that's not what most game masters are actually running. Game masters are not running a game with a bunch of other game masters, right? game designers do it all the time, right? And so I, going forward, the reason why I made this video is I really care about TRPG game design, and I think so there's a couple problems that this raises up, right? Is one, what do you do with this issue of these powered by the of basically tabletop role-playing game designers need to stop creating games that they play test with a bunch of other game masters. You need to play test your game with bad players, right? Nobody wants to hear that, but it's the reality, right? Now, the other thing is, if you want to make a game like PBTA, right? And you don't want to make a game that you make a game that can easily be ruined by a bad player, right? And here's how a PBTA game is ruined by a bad player. Well, I heard that there's a rumor that there's a laser gun and a 69 Camaro and that's buried 20 feet under the ground right outside. It's just so easy. Like, bad players can tank these games so fast, right? If game designers want to create these kind of games, right, that can be easily tanked by a bad player, but are absolutely awesome if you have a group of game masters, right, playing it, one real game master and 4 other game masters taking the seat of taking the seat of 4 players, then they need to put a sticker on it, right? You need to put a warning sticker on your game. So one last time, a big thank you to Chalice and Chains. Check out his content. He is truly a TRPG explorer. Really, really interesting. Great channel. I'm always thankful for his content. Definitely point you over there. And it looks like and from that one video about PBTA, you'll also be linked up to some other really solid PBTA commentators. Take care.